All right. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So there is a matter that I would like to discuss, which is just a human thing where oftentimes we might feel that we lost interest, we lost probably the enthusiasm to do anything, etc. And we might confuse depression with such a feeling. At the same time, at times we might feel that we're afraid we haven't done enough, and at other times we feel hopeful. And I would like to say that it's a very normal human feeling where we can have these relapses. These relapses can sometimes be confused that it's a sign of depression, but in Islam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, or of course, we even see it in the Sahaba's life, in the scholars, in different times, even prophets, and we see it even in scholars. When you look at different times where one might have actually felt a relapse, there are certain times where we could see that fear is overcoming us. Perhaps fear that we haven't done enough, fear that we remembered a certain sin, and fear that perhaps we're getting near death and I didn't do what I had wanted to do, etc. This is the fear that a mu'min would also get rewarded for. So to feel the regret for, let's say, a certain sin, or to feel afraid that you might be held accountable for something, etc. This is a normal mu'min feeling. This is the feeling that a mu'min lives in between al-khawf wal-raja. What is al-khawf and the raja? What are they? So al-khawf is fear. Al-raja is hope. Okay. When we're living in a state of khawf, that fear state, oftentimes it's not a pleasant feeling. The feeling of fear, when it takes longer times, it can indeed be an area of probably leading us to depression. So when would we classify it as depression, and we would tell the person to seek treatment, to probably seek a professional help, when the person is not capable of doing their daily tasks, perhaps, or they're probably prolonged, maybe crying. They don't want to perhaps engage with other people, the different things that they're probably doing, etc. So if we're seeing a person, when we're seeing a person not capable of doing what they need to do in terms of responsibilities, giving rights, etc., all of these different things, then we would say, hey, you really need to seek professional help. If it is prolonged, but if it is short timed, so we're talking about a month, 2 months, 3 months, we would say it's still within perhaps a time frame where the person is, I guess, living, needing more of support from the friends, support maybe listening to certain lectures to do one thing. What is that? Remember when we talked about al-khawf wal-raja? If a person is living in a state of khawf, you need to come in and balance that and give them raja. Okay? Give them hope. So let's say a person is feeling so regretful and feeling so bad about their sins, or about some things that they had probably missed out on their life, etc. They're regretting something, okay? Then in that situation, you have to balance that and tell them, well, you had done these good deeds, you had done this much, so you're going to balance it, probably by reminding them of good things, maybe of telling them about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy, maybe reminding them of Jannah, maybe reminding them, hey, it's never too late. You can still do it. And what are you doing? Right now, then, you are balancing their fear into putting them into raja. Now, let's look on the other side. Now, that person that's living the fear is definitely living a moment of insecurity. Now, there are different reasons to why somebody might be living in fear. At many times, the fear, let's say, status would many times be as a result, probably after a sin, or maybe a result of perhaps age, maybe a result of knowledge. A result of knowledge could also be taking the person into fear. How so? So the scholars actually explained that for some, knowledge can be a tool and an instrument that can take the person into an arrogance and can take the person into fear. For those that have taqwa, ilm can increase in their taqwa and increase in their isolation. How does it increase in their isolation? Because whenever they would focus on ilm, they would start losing people that are interested in communicating with them because they're not finding this person, at least and in their area of understanding, and this person is probably going to be confused, of course, by these people, by the general masses, that this person is mutafayqih, that this person is being arrogant, this person is boring. This person is basically speaking of things that we don't understand, and the list goes on and on. So because this person slowly feels that people are beginning to not understand them, then they would choose to isolate. Some of the figures that chose to isolate from the Sahaba, for example, is Abu Dharr al-Ghifari. Some of the other Sahaba, you had Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, you had Imam Malik. He was choosing to completely isolate that he would not even talk to people, did not engage with people, and would even do the dars and just go home and not speak with anyone, not invite anyone, not engage with anybody's, I guess, personal life or even community, etc. He would just be on his own. You had prophets as well. When you look at, for example, Prophet Nuh عليه السلام, at the end, رَبِّ لَا تَذَرْ عَلَى الْأَرْضِ مِنَ الْكَافِرِينَ دَيَّارًا. You had Prophet Nuh عليه السلام. Ya Allah, لَا تَذَرْ عَلى الْأَرْضِ مِنَ الْكَافِرِينَ دَيَّارًا. When he was saying, Ya Allah, don't let any kafir have any life on earth. When you read and you hear this ayah, it actually contains a very important inference within it. If you read within the lines, when would you say, Ya Allah, don't let anybody on earth that is a kafir, etc. What does it really contain? What do you read in between the lines is that you read a person that is angry, a person that is giving up, a person that definitely lost hope in people, a person that just didn't want any connections with them, etc. And you could see that the word, for example, that Nuh had lived ألف سنة إلا 50 عاما. And when you look at ألف سنة إلا 50 عاما, why didn't it say ألف سنة إلا 50 سنة? Even though the word sana is really the same thing as عام, but it's actually not the same. ألف سنة, so the word sana is actually having a shared etymology, which is a sina. What is a sinna? A sinna is basically a drought. Is a drought. So when you say alfa sana, that it basically is like droughtful years. Like droughtful years, they were not happy years. And then illa khamsina ama, in 50 years are al-am. What is al-am? Even though it's the same shared thing, it's 365 days. Sana is 365 days, and am is 365 days. Okay. But when you say sana, you're actually talking about years that are droughtful, years that are stressful, full of anxiety. But then Il'ama is telling us that he only lived 50 years of am, meaning that it was like a relaxed time. Il'am is more, it's a year not full of surprises. It was a calm year. Only 50 years were calm, and the rest, 950 years, they were full of anxiety, full of stress, full of surprises, and that's why they were called sana. Look at that. It's interesting to see how when prophets, when Anbiya, when you look at Ibn Taymiyyah, he actually chose to be in Sijn Tadmur, in the prison in Syria. And this prison was actually in the middle. So it was in the middle of the sea. It was like an island. And he actually chose to get imprisoned. Why? Because he wanted to isolate himself from everyone, because he wanted more time. He was living within himself. That in order to cultivate that ilm, he needed to isolate. So when you look at ilm, increasing your thirst for isolation or maturity/age, cultivating and enhancing your thirst for isolation, same thing. That's an area of positive yet tricky area when you would want isolation. And I talked about al-Sha'rawi, I talked about Shafi'i as well. Sha'rawi, and even though he was very introverted, but then at the end of his life, he wanted to be extroverted and chose to isolate. When you talk about a Shafi'i, he, even though he wasn't old, like when he died, he was only 45 years old, but at the end of his times, yes, he had severe hemorrhoids, and the severe illness in hemorrhoids, even though hemorrhoids is supposed to be something that is treatable, but I guess maybe he didn't have the professional help to help him treat hemorrhoids, but it got so bad that it actually got infected. So he would sit on a pillow, imagine that. He would sit on a pillow just to have this pillow absorb the bleeding from the hemorrhoids. Just imagine, sitting on the pillow in itself is extremely painful for someone that has hemorrhoids. Yes, you can make it into like a donut shape and you can do that to help, but it still is painful. Whether you rest on your side, every single position is painful and definitely may require, witch hazel and all these different things and sitting in tubs and all of that, but that's a different story. But at the end, did he actually have the help that is needed? No. So he was living in so much pain, but one thing he was saying is that he was always wanting that he would find a friend. And you could say, well, what do you mean you couldn't find friends? I mean, Shafi'i died 205 Hijriya. How is it that you couldn't find friends during that time? And that takes us into the last one, to why some of the Salihin would, at the end of times, and even before that, the Salihin would actually choose to isolate. The Salihin would choose to isolate because, one, they start feeling that they want to live in the pleasant feeling of connecting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Dhikr, salah, iman, and even their vision in life is completely different. And they would just have this pleasant feeling. If you were to tell it to anybody, they won't understand it. The feeling of the al-ishq al-ilahi, that's what the Sufis call it. It's kind of a deep love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that other people would not understand and just think that it's boring to talk about, of how you realize the magnificence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how you enjoy your salah, how you just enjoy time of dhikr, how you enjoy reading Quran, how you enjoy listening to the classes, etc. People will find it boring, but you find so much happiness in that when people start finding it boring, you find yourself, well, I guess they don't understand what I'm talking about. So you start isolating yourself because it doesn't feel good when you're sharing something and people are probably mocking you. You feel people are not understanding you. You feel that I'll just live within myself. So now that takes us to increase in iman, increase in ilm, increase in shaghaf. What is a shaghaf? A shaghaf increase that you have probably the enthusiasm, whether to seek ilm, whether to be active, and other people are not at your pace. You're trying to be active, maybe, pass up pamphlets in some fair, or probably participate in this class and that class, and etc. And people are not understanding, like, this is boring. It's like, yeah, I've done that once a week or once a month, but I'm not going to do it every day. But for a person that has this shaghaf, that's what makes joy to them. So they start just wanting to, yes, I want to do the da'wah, but people are not relating to me. You will start feeling that you want to isolate yourself, and you do your own shaghaf, your own enthusiasm to perhaps seek ilm, maybe memorize, maybe pass out flyers, etc., all of that. So you'll start finding yourself isolating from people, but engaging with people, but at your own pace, because other people can't catch up with your pace. So whether it's can't catch up with your enthusiasm, or can't catch up with your iman, or can't catch up with your ilm, or can't catch up with even your ambitions, that's when you will start feeling that, okay, I'll live within myself. That's not necessarily wrong. But that's how leaders always start out, okay? They always live within themselves because other people are not sharing their inner space. So they start enjoying the inner space of their enthusiasm, of their iman, of their hope, of their fear, of their of their ilm, of their maturity, of their expanded vision, of their insight, etc. They start feeling that no one shares that space. No one understands what I'm lurking, what I'm looking forward to, what I'm trying to do, what I'm feeling. No one understands it. So you start enjoying it with yourself, or you start looking at it within. So because you're so focused within, your relationship with the outside starts to diminish, reduce bit by bit, bit by bit, and then you start focusing within. That is actually a good sign. Believe it or not, a lot of times it's a good sign, unless the person is incapable of doing their daily tasks. And I would say you really need professional help. If the person is starting to lose hope, etc., but you want to look at the difference. A person in a state of depression is not a person seeking to be active, enthusiasm, and is not a person in a state of depression. They will probably even lose hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's kufr. A person in a state of depression, they might lose hope in even doing their ibadah or even talab al-ilm. That's a completely different thing. Now you see the fine line. A person in a state of depression is losing everything, but a person in a state of inner hope, inner enthusiasm for talab al-ilm, inner enthusiasm for maybe iman, inner enthusiasm for maturity, etc. That's not depression. It's that they had changed their area of activism from being outside, external, to being internal. You see the fine line from being external and being shared by others to being internal and only shared perhaps by themselves or share it with designated people, only certain amount of people. So talab al-ilm, the higher you go up in ilm, the less amount of people that are capable of understanding what you're talking about, understanding probably what you're trying to get to in your perhaps goal in seeking talab al-ilm, and then you're going to find less and less people interested in being around you and less people interested in engaging in any conversation with you. So you start reducing these social interactions because you will only have a very small number of individuals that are even capable of understanding, capable of probably being mature enough to engage in a conversation with you, and a long conversation. A person that is, for example, for talab al-ilm, a person that is not used to talab al-ilm, they'll probably take 3 minutes to listen to a nice halaqah, etc. 3 minutes is all they can do. 15 minutes, ooh, they think they did a good job. Half an hour, to them, it's a wonderful job. For a person that is well-versed and is, let me say, a real talib al-ilm that has extreme shaghaf, they can actually go for talib al-ilm from the second that they wake up till they sleep. Even if you were to give them food, like al-Bukhari, his slave girl would put the food and then he would forget to eat it. He would forget to eat it. The bread would harden. The food would basically go cold, and he's still just into his talab al-ilm. From the second he wakes up to the second that he sleeps, he's just doing that. And in fact, he'll even not have enough time to sleep, so he will reduce the sleep. Just like when you look at Imam al-Bukhari, his warraq used to say, I would fall asleep because I am so tired from traveling, and al-Bukhari would still not be asleep. He would wake up in the middle of the night a couple times doing 2 rak'ahs and writing the ahadith, but I can't keep up with his enthusiasm. I can't keep up with his ability to seek ilm. So he was not sleeping enough, etc. So now you look at that. Can I describe al-Bukhari? Can I describe al-Bukhari as going through depression? The answer is no, because he was still having the enthusiasm to seek talab al-ilm. He was still having the enthusiasm to work, the enthusiasm to perhaps engage in the activism, engage in all of that. That was not depression. Okay, so just to see those lines, and certainly when a person is living in al-khawf, you have to come in right there and balance that and say, let me see how I can give this person raja. If this person is living in extreme raja, that person might actually be at risk for losing their engagement in having that khawf. Why? Because they would feel like, I made it to Jannah, I'm all set, and then they will get into fitna. So any person that lives in absolute khawf, That's a problem. And then because they might actually fall in having qunut min rahmatillah, in a person that goes into complete raja, that's also a problem because يحسبون أنهم يحسنون صنعا. And طول الأمل, and having this type of hope that I'm all done, I've done a good job, I don't have any sins, and yeah, I did a sin, but I did my istighfar, so I'm okay, I'm all set. Then in that situation, you had طول الأمل, and you thought that you were forgiven, but who knows whether you were or not. And this طول الأمل lets the person fall into a fitna and not necessarily get into taking that balance and living in al-khawf. So every mu'min is supposed to live just like that bird that Ibn al-Qayyim had talked about, that al-mu'min lives between two wings of al-khawf and al-raja. Al-khawf and al-raja. Without two wings, you're going to be in a state of an imbalance. You have to balance yourself between al-khawf and al-raja to live in a state of al-iman. So I'm just sharing this one a little off tafsir, but inshallah we're going to get into our tafsir. We are still at this ayah. Where was it? Here we go. We're still at this ayah. We actually finished this ayah, did we? No, we didn't. Okay. أحل لكم صيد البحر وطعامه متاعا لكم وللسيارة وحرم عليكم صيد البر ما دمتم حرما واتقوا الله الذي إليه تحشرون. So we went into the tafsir of this ayah that it was permitted upon you the hunting from the sea and ta'amuhu, and we said differences of opinions on whether this is talking about the fish that is floating or what perhaps was thrown at seashore, or whether this is talking about the different corals or the different plants in the sea, etc. But at the end, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says mata'an lakum, and we went into details and the differences of opinions on whether it is permissible to eat from the fish that floats at sea, or I guess that was found on the seashore, and we already know it's dead, certainly, because by floating, that actually means gases were trapped inside, and therefore that basically means that it's been dead for a while, and therefore starting to decompose. So is it haram or halal? We went in details with that. We also went in details with, okay, what is the ruling in consuming and eating certain animals that might be part live, or like amphibians living on land and also living at the sea? Are they considered sea creatures? Are they considered sea animals? What do we classify them as? And we went in details, and let's say deep details in talking about the differences of opinions, whether we should use one, their area of spending most of the time, is it on land or is it on sea? Or two, should we use where they would reproduce in and what they eat? Well, that's the third opinion. That was Abu Hanifa. The third opinion regarded that, no, we're going to look at what they eat. And if they were consuming things that are considered of land, like land animals, then in that situation, we would consider them as land animals, herbivores, and therefore permissible to eat. So again, this is just to summarize. So animals that, of course, amphibians, part land, part earth, part land, part water. Basically, you could see differences of opinion. So we went in details with that. Now, what about the sea animals that have canine teeth? So like sharks, dolphins, alligators, etc. We also talked about the differences of opinions between scholars, where the first group of scholars considered that the general the generalization in the ahadith that had said that eating and consuming animals with canine teeth is basically haram, and therefore that included the animals that were living at sea. And of course, we said Ibn al-Arabi's opinion that he had said, yes, we've got strong evidences that prove that sea animals, or certain sea animals, let's say it that way, certain sea animals or certain amphibians are halal, and they do definitely fit the general ahadith that speak of them being halal, or at least of certain animals. So they would fit the descriptions of sea animals, and they would also fit the descriptions of perhaps different land animals. So then they went into those discussions, but then Ibn al-Arabi basically chose al-khuruj min al-khilafi awla, that staying on the safe side because of the contradictory evidences, that is always best. And the most important thing in learning about this whole thing, I know many, and I know most of us are probably not going to go hunting, and especially perhaps while we are in a state of ihram, but it's important to build and create a mindset, a methodology in how we understand fiqh, how we would have that insight, the vision to understand Islam, to understand fiqh, to understand how we research different matters. That to me is the most important thing. I want you to see how we would research those references, how we would classify these references for us to understand how that science goes and what is the basis of that science, and how we would basically study these different matters. And it's not an issue of opinion, and that we really have a lot to learn in how the scholars created a very expansive and an intricate vision and have resources to study the matters. And Lugha Arabiya is also key to understanding fiqh, understanding Islam, understanding tafsir. And of course, just wanted to give you a taste of it. I didn't want to go in all those details, but I thought it was important in order to create a foundation to help us create such vision and to help us expand our ability to research in those areas, not necessarily research as an academic research, but at least understand and respect the different capacities that different scholars would invest in giving ilm on different matters. So just wanted to note that, because there's just wanted to note that. Inshallah, I'm thinking that it would be a better idea to, I guess, skip going into all these details, because I'm seeing that I think we talked enough about animals and about the different rulings, and I thought it would be good to kind of skip and go into a different topic. And inshallah, hopefully, we kind of built a good foundation and a good idea about what we're supposed to be hunting. So Noura, please don't hunt in the wrong place and at the wrong time. Forget your skills for now and try to use them elsewhere. Okay. So, and same thing with Sister Umayya. Please do not use your skills or your hunting skills while in your state of ihram, and focus on your dhikr at that time. Okay. Can we use that? We promise to do that? I'm sure you will promise. So please put it in the chat and
Yes,
tell me you
ma'am.
promise.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Just just promise me you won't go hunting, Arwa and Latifa and Nisreen. Just promise me you won't go hunting. While you're in a state of ihram, and okay. And then we'll skip that piece of it. All right. So inshallah, Remember, I think we didn't focus enough about the taking or even uprooting or even cutting down. So even if you were to break a twig from a tree within the premise, al-Haram premise, or even Medina premise, you want to make sure that you don't do that, because you're in a state of ihram, then that would nullify, or at least that would risk your ihram. Okay, so I'm going to go to the following ayah, because you promised that you won't go hunting while you're in a state of ihram. جعل الله الكعبة البيت الحرام قياما للناس. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had made al-Kaaba. What is al-Kaaba? Al-Kaaba, of course, you all know it, but I'm just going to let you see it. Okay, here's al-Kaaba right there. So this is the actual Kaaba. Al-Kaaba, the word Kaaba actually means cube. It means cube. So we're going to get to where does the word come from in just a bit. جعل الله الكعبة البيت الحرام. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had made al-Kaaba is al-Bayt al-Haram, is the sacred house or the sacred space or the sacred premise. We'll talk about that in details, inshallah. قياما للناس, a place of qiyam, a place of security, a place of spirituality, a place of sanctity. That's al-Qiyam. We'll talk about that. وَالشَّهْرَ الْحَرَامِ. الشَّهْرَ الْحَرَامِ, there were sacred months, but those months the Arab had made sacred even before Islam, because you want to keep in mind the Arabian Peninsula was, I guess, a desert area, or it still is a desert area. And in order to survive within that area, they needed to secure certain months for religious tourism. And during this religious tourism, they wanted to make sure that it was safe for people to travel in, and their existence definitely depended on this religious tourism, because through this tourism, they were going to, of course, enrich and enhance their trade, because they didn't have a fertile land to grow their crops, so they depended a lot on this type of trade, and the type of trade was happening during those months. And you want to keep in mind, the people of business, so business people, they're not experts in fighting. They're actually very diplomatic, hypocritical, if you would want. The reason for that is because they recognize that in order to create any relations, whether it's a business relation, you need it to be political. Because if you are going to be at war with these people, they're not going to do trade with you, because they're just going to do one thing, which is to harm you. But a business person was more peaceful and is more peaceful, because what they want to do, they recognize by creating peace and by creating stability and a type of a politically stable area, that's what makes business flourish. That's what makes economy flourish. So you would see that business people, they are very good at trying to be diplomatic and not necessarily engage in fights and engage in these types of, frictions. So they would avoid friction as much as they can, or they may isolate themselves a little bit, but they still recognize that I have some interest with you and that I might need to work with you. My business might actually be needing your type of business. So that's why they would engage in a calm relationship. And that's what the Arab were like, at least within Quraysh. Within Quraysh, they avoided fighting. In fact, Quraysh only went in one battle and they even lost it, because they were not experts in fighting because they knew that if they were to engage in constant war, this can mean their existence and their survival being at risk. So just keep that one in mind. I find it interesting that oftentimes Orientalists want to picture that the Prophet ﷺ came into a place where everyone was at war. That's actually not true. Unlike the people of Medina, just look at this one. Unlike the people of Medina, they actually engaged in a lot of wars. Now, you want to keep in mind that the terrain in Medina was completely different than the terrain in Mecca. The terrain in Mecca was not fertile, and therefore their existence, their food, depended a lot on رحلة الشتاء والصيف, on the trade that happens between بلاد الشام, the Levant, and Yemen. Versus the people in Medina, their land was very fertile. It depended on the palm trees. They had a good amount of rain. It basically had a different climate, and therefore, I guess they didn't care much about that piece of it. And certainly, you had an upper class that was generally Jewish that needed to keep the working class at war with each other, which is basically al-Aws wal-Khazraj. They needed to keep, the upper class needed to keep the lower class at war. That way the lower class, the laborers, would not unite against the against the upper class. So they kept them at war, and the war lasted for almost 70 years and even more. So you're talking, and many had actually died in these wars. So the people in Medina would engage in all these wars, which later created the need to why the people of Medina were in search of a person, a leader that would come in and bring about stability and peace because of all the different wars that had already, I guess, brought a lot of distress in the different families and the different homes in Medina. So I want you to compare these two, and that's a Shahr al-Haram coming in during the times of Hajj. There were al-Ashhur al-Hurum, and we're going to talk about that in details to bring about stability in order to ensure religious tourism, to ensure the people during Hajj that they would be safe until they would finish their Hajj and so forth and come back to or go back to their countries, etc. وَالْهَدْيِ وَالْقَلَائِدِ. They would drive with them the different animals that they wanted to slaughter. We're speaking about goats, sheep, camels, and cows. والقلائد. القلائد, they would basically assign these الهدي, and they would, I guess, put some signs, قلائد. They would put some bangles on them. I don't know if you even call them bangles, but different, I guess, different things that they would, make their animals look good, I guess. I don't know. They would put these different ornaments on these animals, and that was permissible in order to basically, I guess, be happy about the ritual itself. And ذلك لتعلموا أن الله يعلم ما في السماوات وما في الأرض. That's for you to know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows what is in the heavens and what is on earth. Or what is, ما في الأرض, okay? وأن الله بكل شيء عليم. And that the Lord Almighty is all-knowing over everything. How is that related to the ayah before it? What are the different details in this ayah? Well, that's what we're going to do, inshallah, in this ayah. And we're going to get into discussing a number of different things relating to the tafsir of this ayah. Let's see. فيه 5 مسائل. Al-Qurtubi says that there are 5 different matters to discuss in regard to this ayah. He said the word that was used is ja'ala. ja'ala, which actually means khalaqa. What does that mean? So ja'ala can mean to create something from something, and khalaqa can mean to create something from nothing. Okay? Or that's the same thing as bara'a. Okay? To create something from nothing. So here you could see ja'ala is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had designated basically al-Kaaba to be at a certain symbol of something, or at a symbol and commemorating a certain thing. We're going to see that. What is al-Kaaba and what does it look like? So al-Kaaba is because it is squared. So al-Kaaba actually means it's a cube. And the reason why it's called a cube is because it is a cube, and most of the Arab homes were circle. That one's really rather strange. How was it that it was circle shaped, and why did they circle it? I don't know, to be honest, in terms of architecture. I actually thought that making a cube was easier to design than a circle, because a circle requires, that's what I thought, to be honest. But same thing, I'd be happy to listen to our architecture. Why did even I guess the Africans in certain areas, they would make their homes into a circle. Same thing, if we're talking about the Eskimo, they did it into like a sphere. I don't really know why the Arab even made their homes circle and why the Kaaba was square. I don't know what the significance is, to be honest. Let's see. Other scholars said that it was squared, or it was called Kaaba and not necessarily square, because it stands out. So it wasn't by looking at the shape of it, but it's basically looking at a certain, I guess, structure, and where it stands out. It is not like the rest of the buildings. And everything that sticks out, whether we're speaking about al-Ka'b is basically the heel, that's sticking out from your leg, and that's why it's sticking out Ka'b. And same thing if we're talking about كواعب أترابا, it's talking about the structure, the anatomy of the women of Jannah, كواعب, and a certain structure within their breast area that it sticks out, and basically discussing that and describing it as kawaib. Okay, so let's see. And he said, wal bayt, and why is it called bayt? So al-bayt al-haram, or al-bayt al-haram, why is it called al-bayt? Why the word bayt? So the word bayt, it actually comes from the root bata. Okay, so in Lugha Arabiya, let me write that down. Okay, is it all related to that? Okay, here we go. I'm going to write it down. Bata. So the word bata is coming from that root bata, which actually means the time of comfort, the time for sleeping, the time for just, I guess, tranquility. That's what bata is. So a time for stability, a time for tranquility, etc. So that's what a bayt is. But why is it bayt here? Here he said, because it basically has a ceiling and different walls. And he said, because وهي حقيقة البيتية, and because that's what the structure of a house would be. The structure of a house would have walls, would have a door, and even though there's no one living in it, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had called it a bayt because it has a certain structure, and he called it haram. Now, here's one thing. When you look at the word haram, you would just think of something that is forbidden. Okay, but haram can mean forbidden, and can mean a red line to something, and could also mean sacred. So think of it as this is the sacred area. So this was the sacred area And that's why the Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّ مَكَّةَ حَرَّمَهَا اللَّهُ وَلَمْ يُحَرِّمُهَا النَّاسِ. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was the one that had designated Mecca as haram, as al-Bayt al-Haram, as the area that is sacred, and it's not the people that regarded it as sacred. So what did he really want to say? So we've got al-Bukhari and al-Muslim had narrated the hadith. What did he want to say? He wanted to say that when you're looking at Mecca, it wasn't necessarily a cultural practice that Islam was trying to keep as based on what the Arab had done, but it was actually tracing back all the way to Prophet Ibrahim, tracing back all the way to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had regarded as a place that is sacred. In other words, it's not reviving a cultural practice, but it was reviving a divine attribute, a divine sanctity that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had regarded for the place. And it was not necessarily some folkloric, some kind of a practice that the Arab had done, but it was a divine orientation. It was a divine designation by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, an orientation by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that, and of course, a choice in a chosen place. In other words, it was anointed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and not necessarily by the people. That's what the Prophet ﷺ wanted to emphasize. It's not by the people, but it's actually by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, قياما للناس. So why was it even chosen? And of course, when you say قياما للناس, this is actually giving me that the reason for it. That's why it's basically mansuba right there. قياما للناس, telling us, well, why is it Kaaba and al-Bayt al-Haram? Why was it chosen as a Bayt Haram? Why was it this? And the ayah then explains قياما للناس. The reason for that is basically to give the people al-qiyam. What is al-qiyam? Al-qiyam could be al-salah wal-ma'ash, in other words, their life, their and also their salah. What is their salah? What is a salah? A salah is when a person is gone pious, or when a person has gone pious. So what does that mean? That al-Kaaba was supposed to resemble a place for people to relate to the right position. So that's a salah. Al-Ma'ash was for people to relate to what keeps and maintains their life. So what does that mean? We're talking about Mecca was resembling a vision where you would, if the person is facing Mecca, that was to resemble that people are regarding the sacred paths, sacred areas of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it was also a sign that people are taking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's principles seriously. So that's what Kaaba is supposed to resemble. It's supposed to resemble that they're taking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's word seriously. They're taking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's orientation seriously. They're basically taking the centricity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being the center and the Bayt al-Haram as being the center seriously. And therefore, it would be a sign of their orientation towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being in place. And even when we speak about any group of people, their orientation, their understanding of where their orientation is supposed to be facing, that's going to lead to bringing instability and justice, which is a salah wal ma'ash. So when all of that I had said is basically trying to define the word qiyaman linnas. So what does that bring? Well, that brings security. That also brings in what helps them stay in instability, and that also helps them recognize what principles they should be following. That is all in the word قياما للناس. I'm just summarizing what the scholar is saying. Okay. And of course, we could say, and here Qurtubi, he said, and what the scholars had said, and that the wisdom behind Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala making these things as a place of designation for people is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had created people on a certain instinct, on a certain nature. And part of their nature is envy. Part of their nature is competition. Part of their nature is what you would find, or they want to isolate. They want to plot against one another. They want to probably attack other people, maybe retaliate, maybe kill, etc. And therefore, there was a need for the divine wisdom and certainly the divine legislation, the divine will, and certainly that is basically what was going to secure the people. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, Inni ja'alun fil ardi khalifa, when the Lord Almighty had said that He was going to create a khalifa, and that khalifa is the vicegerent that is going to do the necessary, of course, authority, the necessary building, the necessary, of course, implanting, or well, it's more of their on earth building, or at least putting in the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to making sure that everything is done in accordance to the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And He basically, of course, did not necessarily leave the people to decide the rules and to decide the laws on their own, but He basically had laid and certainly had sent down the different principles, the different legislation with the different prophets in order to prevent all these different instincts that are probably, well, we already know that it's part of their nature, in order to create peace, to create justice, to create stability. That was not possible unless there would be a legislation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Himself would legislate as a principle in order to make sure that stability on earth is basically coming in. So Al-Kaaba would resemble orientation. Al-Kaaba would resemble centricity to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Al-Kaaba would resemble legislation as well. So we're speaking about all these areas and seeing the word Al-Bayt al-Haram and Qiyam lin-Nas would also be, I guess, that area that interprets that piece of it. So I'm just right there, and I wanted to quote this one. Uthman bin Affan used to say, ما يزع الإمام أكثر مما يزع القرآن. ما يزع الإمام أكثر مما يزع القرآن. And this one, just keep it in mind that what an imam or a leader might be capable of doing in ordering, in bringing stability within the society, could be an even bigger power than the Quran itself. And the reason for that, of course, you needed to make sure that you keep in mind, I find it so funny and really sad. Many times, this is just on a side, just on a side note, when we speak of the society, and many times people would be speaking about the society and how it should be prepared to religiously to be at a certain level of iman, etc. And I would oftentimes, people would come to me and say, hey, are we going to be getting at a place or at a time where everyone is actually a better Muslim, etc.? Is that what the Khilafah is looking like? And I would say, not necessarily. Not necessarily. In a khilafah, you won't necessarily have everybody's iman at its highest level. Even in a khilafah, you would have to recognize that even within al-Khilafah, when even al-Khilafah al-Abbasiyya, al-Umayyah, and of course all those al-Mamalik, etc., you had the masses were just like you would have the masses today. Some are doing better in their iman, others are not taking their iman seriously, and the list goes on with different, let's call them aberrations, okay? So that's normal to have within the society. I don't want to say that's normal to mean you shouldn't be doing anything about the different aberrations that people are doing. You have to do your job. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, مَعْذِرَةً إِلَىٰ رَبِّكُمْ وَلَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَّقُونَ. You're doing that to excuse yourself from being held accountable that you didn't do your job in letting people find their way to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you do ma'dhiratan ila rabbikum. You do it to excuse yourself from the accountability on Judgment Day when He will ask you, what did you do in regards to the different things that were haram within your society? So you would say, well, I tried to do my piece of da'wah. I tried to make videos. I tried to do classes. I tried to seek ilm myself. I saw this person one day. I was only capable of taking care of my own kids and reminding my own husband or my own kids. That's all I was capable of doing. Or someone else, no, I was capable of doing something even bigger than that. Good for you. All right. Now, here's one thing. When we're speaking about Islamic activism, oftentimes I would see activists sometimes going too utopian, thinking that everyone has to be at a mature level in the way they would deal with the different things around them. I'll give you an example. Right now, what's happening in Syria, you'll see on social media how on social media from the women, I find it really rather funny / sad how many women on social media are talking about the appearance of Ahmad al-Shara, and not necessarily, and I mean appearance and talking about him being attractive and all of that, yet it's really sad because they're not even understanding all the different, and even looking at and really understanding that there is something to focus on, which is there is a lot of conspiracies that are right now basically surrounding what's happening in Syria, because this is unprecedented. This is unprecedented in modern history to have any jama'ah, any group take over Syria, let alone any other country, except in Afghanistan. That was a different story, but take over a country in the Middle East through jihad and with only 11 days. And of course, overthrowing a government that created an alliance with the West and then an alliance with Russia. And then it was, of course, it was definitely a better option for Israel. So we're talking about right now, the West is definitely outraged because they want to see what's the best way to overthrow this government from not being an unprecedented case, because right now, definitely the masses are starting, or in fact, definitely seeing that this new jihadist group is right now as the hero that freed the people from Sinai, that freed the people from prisons, that are probably right now passing sweets to the people, that are right now trying to bring stability. Hey, even right now, they basically let them put a Christmas tree in the middle. So it's completely different than what the stereotypical image of what a jihadist would look like. So now you're seeing, you're seeing this is going to bring a new set of what conspiracies right now are really being plotted in the back end from the other side is what they should be focused on. But you're seeing the masses are focused, especially the women, focused on the appearance of Ahmad al-Shara, looking attractive, looking this, and making these videos, and etc. And I would say, this, don't let it distract you. This is normal, but definitely sad. You be a mature person and focus on what really matters. What really matters right now is to educate, to bring, I guess, a better understanding, to recognize what is out there, to bring about also your role in making the da'wah that is needed. And Allah al-Musta'an, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ya Rabbi, protect Syria, protect Palestine, protect the Muslims in Bangladesh, and you name the country, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ya Rabbi, يجيب اللي فيه الخير. So I wanted to note this one, ما يزع الإمام. When you're seeing a certain governance, all right, a certain governance can be more powerful than all the da'wah you might seen laying out even in the Quran itself. So it's not enough to just speak in da'wah, but you also need to recognize the importance of, let's call it, a government working from up there as well. So أولم, okay, let me see. أولم يروا أن جعلنا حرما آمنا ويتخطف الناس من حولهم. And certainly, you could say al-haram, it was basically said, it was explaining amina, which is another word to explain al-qiyam lin-nas. Why is it qiyam lin-nas? What was it supposed to be resembling? It was supposed to be resembling security. It was supposed to be, that is al-Kaaba, supposed to be resembling a place for people to grow in bringing security, in bringing civilization, in bringing principles on ground, in bringing justice, in bringing, of course, al-aman right there. Because, of course, if you don't have this al-haram al-amin, you're going to see that people are basically going to be attacking one another. So when, of course, you could see just what throughout, of course, the Muslim history, what Islam had brought in terms of security, etc., then that gives us an idea. But that doesn't mean that there were some aberrations and that there were injustices within even al-Khilafah. So even al-Khilafah, yes, there were certain things that definitely were un-Islamic. Okay, just keep that one in mind. So let's not live too utopian thinking that if we were to get the Khilafah, all our problems are fixed. But you would have to recognize that even within al-Khilafah, we had a lot of problems. So what we need to do is basically work towards, let's call it Islamic, let's call it of course, governance through al-Kitab wa Sunnah, regardless of what that what that structure is called, whether it's called khilafa or whether it's called dawla or whether it's called mamlaka. At the end, what we need to seek is basically the governance itself. If you look at al-Mamalik, for example, they were governing by Islam. And of course, they were not whatsoever Qurashiyin, but they had pledged to al-Khilafah al-Abbasiyya. If you go back even earlier, you're talking about al-Khilafah al-Abbasiyya. Yes, it was Khilafah Abbasiyya, but what it really depended on was, at one point, is Salajiqa for protection. In Salajiqa, you're talking about the Uzbek, you're talking about the Kazakh, so completely different group of people. And when you're talking about al-Umayyin, they were more of a monarchy than anything else. Well, same thing with al-Abbasiyin. It was more of a monarchy than a khilafah, but it still was something that was considered as an Islamic power at one point. Just keep that one in mind. Okay, where was I? It's 1:31 already. So here's what we'll do. We'll stop right here, inshallah, and inshallah, we will continue this ayah. We're really close to, hopefully, inshallah, even finishing the whole page. Let's just look at how much we have, okay? So we are at ayah number 97, okay? And we've got, let's see, this page, and got this page and this page. So we only have 1, 2, 3 and half. 3.5 pages left to finishing the whole surah for Surah Al-Ma'idah and then going to Surah Al-An'am. So stay tuned, inshallah. And the rest of the ayat are actually going to take less from Tafseer al-Qurtubi because the rest of the ayat, they don't have a lot of legislation. Only the ayat that have a lot of legislation are the ones that actually take a long time. So if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, inshallah. Okay, let me then pause the recording.